Today's startup offers an inclusive and unbiased stage for startup founders to shine and share their entrepreneurship and startup journeys to inspire international audiences on tech news around the world. Today's startup features fluidIQ co-founders Chris Jung and Theresa Barnes. So, Chris, I'll hand it over to you first to give a brief introduction of yourself and your co-founders and your startup.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time out. I know it's an early morning on the East Coast and very, very early on the West Coast. So thank you so much. My name is Chris Jung. I know everyone kind of wonders how you pronounce that. It's jungle without the LE, Chris Jung. And I'm a mechanical engineer and industrial designer by trade. And, in the last 5 years or so, I've changed my life to focus on my children. I'm a stay-at-home dad right now, and I do prototype work at night. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I can do everything from draw something from scratch to making it on a expensive machinery, and that's really kind of what put me here. During the beginning of the crisis, there was a call for help on the manufacturing of ventilators, and during the crisis, there was discovery of a ventilator made in the 60s. And if you guys PTR right now, you'll see my picture. There's this orange looking thing, and that's a ventilator from the 1960s that has absolutely no moving parts. It works on something called fluidics. And, I saw a call for help on Reddit, and I jumped in to reverse engineer it. And within a couple of days, we were able to come up with a prototype that, worked. And, that was I call it my oh poop moment, my oh shit moment, because up until then, I had never heard of a valve that had no moving parts that could, work as a ventilator. And given that during that time of the crisis, ventilators were in short supply, they required hundreds of parts, they required software, supply chain. To the team, this was obviously, a godsend, so to speak. So we were able to make high fidelity copies of it. We added some features to it to make it more applicable to 2020 standards. We added something called Peep, and that we released as an open source project called the Army Vent. And that's currently available online for anybody that is in need to recreate what they made in the 60s. But in the course of our work, we worked really well as a team, and we realized that, if we had something so valuable, it had a lot of value if we could just make it a little bit more repeatable. The problem with the Army ventilator is that each one had to be fine-tuned before it was deployed. So that fine-tuning of the ventilator, added an extra few steps, and especially out in the field, if you're asked to make some of these adjustments, Dr. Froelke, who's right below me, he mentioned, people are going to have issues. They're up, they're stressed out. They really can't make these adjustments. We got to go with some kind of cartridge, simple, easy to use type system. And in the course of our work, we, if you PTR now, we discovered a new form factor that we now call the Hope Invent. And it's a 3D printable ventilator that has no moving parts, inspired by that earlier 60s design, but with a lot of new technology and new science that we as a team added to it. So we quickly realized that this was a major project to undertake. And that's when Teresa and I started, looking for medical assistance to help validate the product and help us take it further. So we've been very blessed. We have some partnerships that have really helped us take it further. But the main thing about us is we're a public benefit corporation, and what that means is we are a for-profit entity that has a social enterprise mission as well. So our mission is to deliver the best care globally for patients that need it. And our first product is this device, the Hope Invent. What makes fluidics really special is that it has no moving parts, it has no sensors, it has no software. It's basically a physics-based switch. We've basically come down with the science of making the little fluid dynamics in the device operate with high fidelity and high control. So I know it's really kind of dry right now, but I promise the story gets a lot more exciting as we go on. Um, I'd love to just kind of make a brief introduction to the team, and then maybe we can get into like kind of more of the deeper parts of the story, if that's okay, Cheryl.
Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. So I'd love to start with Teresa. Teresa, if you could just do a brief intro, and then we'll kind of dive deeper in a little bit.
Hi, I'm Theresa Barnes. I'm a patient advocate by background. Started a few medical device companies in the past, one with my dad's lung transplant doctor. And am just really happy that the pandemic, not that it happened, but that in the midst of the crisis, that this amazing team came together.
Fantastic.
Dr. Froelke?
Hi, yes. I'm Brian Froelke. I'm an EMS medical director from the greater St. Louis area. I also worked with a number of disaster medical hats and had the wonderful opportunity of getting involved in this team through my friend Teresa, through her pulmonary advocacy. And as an EMS medical director, I've always been fighting with how to provide optimal lung protective ventilation to our patients. And this particular device, as we'll hopefully see in short future, will provide just such optimal ventilatory practices for our patients.
Thanks, Brian. Matt?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. So I am working with Chris and Teresa and Brian and the rest of the team. I'm the COO, and my background is I'm a pharmacist by education, never really practiced. I was fortunate enough to join a company called Eli Lilly out of pharmacy school and spent about 27 years around the world with Lilly in sales, marketing, business development, general management, 5 years in Japan handling commercial operations, and a couple of years in Europe responsible for a business unit for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Had the good fortune to be able to start a pharma company, worked for Myriad Genetics in charge of their oncology sales for a while, and have been doing some consulting in the pharma and biotech space, a lot of licensing in and out of Japan. And when Teresa, as you'll hear, the glue that kind of sticks all of us together with fluidIQ kind of reached out and grabbed me about a year and a half ago, and it's been a whirlwind ride ever since. So look forward to the story, and it's pretty darn exciting. Thanks.
And then last but not least, John?
Morning, everyone. My name is John Bailey. I'm the CFO. I live in the Boston area. A little bit of my background, more than 20 years of finance and management consulting background. Early part of my career was more on the larger public companies, Sarbanes-Oxley work. In terms of life sciences, worked with big pharma, companies like Sanofi, Genzyme. Also worked on startups in DNA sequencing and big data and AI. Also have some background in software and aerospace. In the last 7-8 years, I've worked predominantly in the startup space, done a lot of fundraising. I'm also a mentor at Cornell University, where I got my MBA, and here in the Boston area at MIT. And I'm also a judge and mentor at Mass Challenge. So for every cohort, I typically, screen about 30 to 50 startups for every cohort. So pretty dialed into the startup space. I've been with the team since February. And it's just been amazing to work with a group of folks, with the breadth and depth of knowledge that they have. And it's very uncommon to have this deep of a team at this early stage of the company. So we're pretty excited about the direction of the company. Thanks.
Such an awesome team, Chris. How fortunate are you?
I'm blessed, and that's really kind of what I want to share with this private, the smaller group here is that, 5 years ago, my wife and I were really battling with infertility. We deeply love each other. We really, really wanted to start a family. And, about 6 years ago, we were told, look, you guys probably won't be able to ever have your own children. Consider egg donation, consider adoption. And there's nothing wrong with those, we want to do those, but what I really wanted to enjoy was kind of the quirkiness of each of us. We're not necessarily, run-of-the-mill people. So when we were finally able to have children, the two kids that are normally on my profile, that's my daughter and that's my middle son. I had two IVF girls, and my boy was kind of a God's or miracle baby. And so the time scale that I'm playing with here, everybody, is on a civilizational time scale. I know that sounds ridiculous, but like I got what I wanted from the universe, everybody. Like I would see ants walking around and be depressed because ants figured out how to reproduce. And here I was with my wife, who I thought, I am a decent human being. I'm good to people. Why did God or whatever curse us? And so I was very, very sad. And so when we were blessed enough to have children, I went all in on the kids. 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day, mommy and me classes dealing with, masculinity issues in some cases, and it was worth it to me. So when a mission like this comes up, where I actually am giving up some of that time with my kids to pursue a worthy mission like this, it can only come, if the mission is really important, and you can only build great teams if the mission's important. And so, I'll say this right now, everyone on this stage has put in money into the company. I'm the only one that's taken it out, and that's to really help cover some of the childcare expenses. My wife and I are both very busy, and we don't like the children kind of having to take care of themselves while we're in meetings. So I feel blessed. And for that reason, we're moving on a different time scale. And if you look at the picture now, you'll see what the device is. It's just a piece of plastic. It's shaped like a Y. And how this works is as the lung builds up with pressure, that jet can't fill up a lung anymore, and it's forced to switch to the exhaust. And when it switches, the lung drains out. And what makes this beautiful is it has no sensors. It has no software. It just always works. It'll always hit the pressures we designed it to hit. And our big game plan is over time to turn this into, and what we didn't realize when we created it is, this is the world's first fully digitally deployable medical machine. A ventilator normally has hundreds of parts. You have to ship them. It's expensive to ship them. It's expensive to maintain them. This is just like music when we went from records to MP3s. And so for me, that's the business we're building. We're trying to build the future of medicine. Space is going to need devices like this. You can't go into space with a 20-pound ventilator. That's going to cost you millions of dollars. It's $5,000 to get a kilo of payload into low Earth orbit with SpaceX right now, and that's the cheapest ticket on the planet. And so a 20-kilo ventilator going to Mars must cost $5 million in fuel. So the future of humanity needs devices that can be digitized and distributed on 3D printers or whatever the future holds. And so that's why we're moving on this scale, and that's why we're really taking our time with it. We've been in what's called the Valley of Death for a medical device company. That's when they've come up with a proof of concept, but they're waiting for regulatory clearance. So we've been pushing through it, taking our time, and raising funds, building the team, and I'm absolutely blessed. And I'd love to just have the rest of the team share a little bit, and then field questions, Cheryl. But this is why I'm doing it. The device is so useful for somebody, a child in Africa that has no chance. This is their chance. It's a piece of plastic that weighs 12 grams. The way I feel about it is our engineering team, our business development team has really solved the hard part of it. Now, if humanity can't figure out how we can get it to the world, we need to readjust how we market the product. But this isn't something that can't be given out if hundreds of people needed it, and that's why we created the public benefit. And I'll shut up now. My famous sign off line.
So it's
Yes,
great to hear,
Brian.
Chris. Oh, so it's great to hear, Chris, about some of the aspects that you bring up from a medical director perspective. In a physician perspective, I am really excited about two aspects of this device, the safety and the simplicity, and they go kind of hand in hand. Starting off with the safety, we really focus from the beginning on lung protective ventilation, which means trying not to cause more harm than good and damage to the lungs, which can occur from standard operations of things like bag valve mask in improper ventilation settings, where the lung is actually damaged in the process of trying to save the patient, resuscitate them, keeping them breathing, all very worthy causes and worth some risk. If we can make that more safe for the patient and decrease those spikes in pressure that can cause damage to the lungs, that was the optimal goal for a device like this to help protect the lungs of those patients that we're trying to save. At the same time, we also have to consider the providers. So for a device like this, 3D printable, small in size, but also capable of doing just what it needs to do and no more than it should be doing. And when we think about an emergency environment, a disaster environment, many of our providers are forced into a position where their minds and skills are being pulled in multiple different directions. And times we are using people and providers that may not necessarily be familiar with the equipment or is fully familiar with the environment in which they're practicing. All of those type of things can lead to some errors in provision of service or decreased level of service. By generating a device that is so simple to use that it's just plug and play, it allows individuals who are being torn in multiple directions to have a simple way of managing the airway and the respirations for the patient. And at the same time, it allows the lowest level of provider to be able to simply plug this device in and count the respirations and feel reasonably confident that the pressures and what is being delivered to the patient is appropriate and as safe as we can make it in that environment. And those type of things from a medical direction perspective, focusing on both the patients I serve as well as the providers who are providing the care is really exciting to me.
And Brian, this is Teresa. I'd like to add on to what you're saying, and just by giving a real world example. So not too long ago, I was talking with a family member, and he told me about a situation where he's not medically trained, a situation where he was being asked to provide what's called bag valve mask breathing. So you've probably seen it on any number of emergency TV shows if you're not medical. You've seen it because it's a big plastic bulb about the size of a football, and it has a mask attached to it. And the provider will squeeze the football to push air into the patient's lungs. So that device is what Brian's talking about. And so when my family member was asked to provide this bag valve mask, like breathing for patient, he said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Well, we don't have another person." They only had a couple of emergency medical people, and they said, we have to have your hands. The unfortunate part is my brother-in-law was flying the helicopter for life flight at the same time. So it's a big deal when the medical people have to rely on a helicopter pilot to help a patient breathe, because they're taking care of all these other patient needs on a single patient. Sometimes there might be 2 or 3 emergency people applying whatever that patient needs. So what Brian's describing is very real, and that is in real world environments, often they just don't have the personnel or the hands to physically do all that needs to be done. So this device can relieve some of that, the issues around using a manual breathing device like the bag valve mask.
Definitely.
Hey, I'm sorry, Cheryl. I was going to
Go
jump
ahead.
in just because Teresa did a great job of describing and visualizing the bag valve mask, and I just wanted to get a little more emotional about how I got to be COO of the company and kind of why I'm still here. I mean, I started with this group back when they formed back in March because of relationships. Teresa, reached out through her sister, knowing that my wife and I, were heavily involved in pharmaceuticals and the biotech space, and I've been providing, some guidance, since last March. I continued to be involved just because, as you hear from Chris and Brian and Teresa, the intellect, the passion, the drive, the commitment. But I joined the company as a COO back in, I think it was December, Chris, because of the technology. I mean, obviously Chris described it well. It's a platform of fluidics that can be applied outside of this medical space. But the initial device, the Hope Invent, is there to save lives and lungs. And just a short story, and I don't think even the team has heard this from me. And I apologize, guys, if I haven't shared it, but my dad suffered from COPD and emphysema for, 10, 15, 20 years. He died at the age of 74 from complications. He had a heart attack from that. And, when I was in high school, he had multiple, and I'll say at least a dozen 911 calls almost always in the middle of the night because of, again, exacerbations, close to respiratory failure. And the EMTs and the paramedics would come in, and oftentimes they would bag him because he was close to respiratory failure. And if you know anything about those kind of patients, he needed certainly, life-saving ventilation, positive pressure, which is what the bag valve mask does, and which is certainly life-saving. But, there are also inherent risks, which Brian and Teresa described. And it's, in these kind of patients, it's the trauma caused by too much pressure being forced in by the EMTs unknowingly and causing damage to the lungs. So I don't know how much longer I would have had with my father. Doubtless his lungs were damaged over the course of many, iterations of using the bag valve mask. But if Hope Infant was around, I can guarantee you he would have lived longer. Now, he certainly still suffered from the sequelae of COPD and emphysema, but he wouldn't have had to suffer from the inherent challenges of a 70-year-old technology in the bag valve mask. So I'm here, for the duration, and we just need to figure out a way to commercialize this enough so that this gets in the hands and in the utility of medical professionals around the world. So again, to Brian, Teresa, and John and Chris, you haven't heard that story from my father, but it keeps me engaged.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Matt. The part I didn't mention of how I even had any boldness to think I would know anything about ventilators is I lost my grandfather in 2006 on a ventilator. He was a morbidly obese gentleman, diabetic, and had COPD and sleep apnea, and went in for a toe amputation. They gave him a self-administered opiate pen, the clicker. And, I said, "Hey, Gramps, how you doing?" And I'm doing good. If you wonder where my humor comes from, guys, it's him. I'm doing great. It's just a little cold in here. It feels kind of like the morgue, and I kind of laughed and, I didn't think anything of it. And I get a call at midnight. "Chris, you got to come down here. Your grandfather's in a coma." And I'm like, what do you mean he's in a coma? I just saw him, a couple hours ago. Well, he's in a coma right now. We don't know what happened. And I had to go through this diagnostic odyssey to figure out, my grandfather always had a record of his health on him on the USB key. And I brought up the COPD and I Googled it and I saw, COPD plus opiates sometimes equals respiratory depression and failure. And so I finally convinced them to pull him off of the opiate. They got him on some kind of non-opiate Toradol or something like that. And he woke up. But it was too late. He got pneumonia, and I lost him on January 6th. Now, this person was my foundational person. I didn't have a father around. My father was in the picture, but not around. So my grandfather taught me everything I know, guys. If you wonder how Chris knows everything, it's because his grandfather didn't talk to him like a baby when he was 3 years old. He taught him math. He taught him algebra. He taught him everything he could. And that's why I'm here, guys. And that's the mission. Sorry, I got emotional there. It's just Matt reminded me of my own personal connection and why I'm here. I knew nothing about it. I just knew there's pressure involved. There's this thing called FiO2. That means how much oxygen you're getting. Those are the things I learned as my grandfather was dealing with that course and eventually succumbed to it. But yeah, that's why I'm here, guys, so that other people don't do that. And then lastly, when the pandemic hit, I asked my neighbors who are ER doctors, like, so what's the worst case scenario if you run out of ventilators? And they said, well, loved ones are going to be there with the bags and bagging their loved ones. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, I didn't know anything about the dangers of it. I'm just thinking that that's torture, because if you stop, your loved one dies. And in 2020, I was like, that's not acceptable. So it's funny, on my birthday, March 18th, was when I decided to jump in on this project. And I haven't looked back. So thanks for that, guys, and thanks for the time and space show.
I'm sure your parents and grandparents must be so proud of you guys and ladies working on this project to save people on this earth. So Chris, or any one of you, what is the biggest challenge you are facing now, be it working together as a team or getting approval from the FDA? What are things that is keeping you awake at night now? Especially Chris.
Well, I would say that it's challenging with the FDA. We have a submission underway. We have to be very careful about what we talk about. So I'm just going to say that the regulatory climb is the steepest part of the valley of death, so to speak. Learning how to raise money is new for me too. I'm very entrepreneurial, but I've never had to raise a pre-revenue enterprise. So raising money when you've made absolutely 0 pennies is challenging, but the team has never been a challenge for me. There's a very important person here who's not here, but his name is Dr. Brian Walsh. And, in this bucket brigade that we had, we're grabbing a bucket to put out fires. You'd never really realize who you're working with. But Dr. Walsh is unique in that he's the former president of the American Association of Respiratory Care. So, the association of importance, respiratory therapists or who are running all the ventilators during COVID was and is one of our co-founders. So he's the one who really came up with the magic of this device that has no moving parts, that can automatically control pressure, that can automatically change tidal volume, that'll deliver a straight minute volume across all pulmonary compliances. And like, it's just one of those amazing journeys that you go on. Everything's a personal connection in this story is what I'm getting at. The reason why besides my grandfather, as a stay-at-home dad, I had a personal friend whose father was a inventor in the respiratory care space. So when this happened, I said, hey, Jim, can you come in and teach, a bunch of engineers the basics? When I jumped in, there's like tens of thousands of engineers in these forums across the internet. And all of us had to learn the basics of respiratory mechanics. And Jim Chua was one of those people early on in the fight that was educating everyone on, PEEP and all the things that we needed to know very quickly to develop products. So everything's a personal connection, guys. Like, you never know who you're going to meet that's going to play a crucial role in some part of your journey, that may ultimately play the role in saving someone's life who may save the world someday. And that's the way you have to look at what you're doing in these types of endeavors, or the machine's just going to eat you up. Because I'll tell you right now, we can have amazing things happen. Like, we can have a positive NIH development because we have a research collaboration with them on Monday. And by Thursday, I'll want to quit because, I got hit by a freight train of news. And the only thing that keeps you going, like Dr. Danish says, is if you focus on the problem and not on the solution, you're going to get through it. So we focus on the problem, which is, getting the best delivery of care in a cost-efficient manner using the technology we've developed. So there's my boilerplate. I'm Chris, I'm done speaking.
Great. Okay, so Chris and the rest of the co-founders, are you ready for the audience Q&A now? We just passed the 30-minute mark.
Sure.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Okay, so those on stage now, you are free to ask questions. Just respect each other. Don't talk over each other. That's all. And those in the audience, if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand or DM me so that I can bring you up. So, who want to go with the first question?
Hi, thanks, Chris. Really amazing road, and I wish you continue your amazing work on this magnificent project. I have a question for you. Was it your first startup that you did with the fluidIQ?
Well, startups have kind of been in my blood for a long time. It's the first pre-revenue startup. So in college, I wasn't the greatest student. Meaning I didn't do a lot of homework. I did well on tests, but didn't do much homework. And I spent most of my time in organizations. I was a fraternity guy. I'm a Sigma Nu. We were a chapter that was really going down the drain when I joined, and I focused on getting back to basics. That's actually an honor fraternity, believe it or not. And by focusing on our charter, I was able to build that team up, and it's now going 20, 30 years later. I was also very involved in engineering student council as a mechanical engineer. I was at the School of Engineering, really promoting student causes and interfacing with the school a lot, and building that club. So you could say I've kind of got the startup bug. I've always built things that I try to have like enduring organizations, even if I can't enjoy the benefits directly right away. So thanks for that question, but it's not my first startup, but my first real startup, for lack of a better word.
Thanks a lot, and you have a beautiful family. Thanks.
You too, Francois. Like your story was fantastic last week. Just amazing, amazing story.
So I've had the opportunity to advise from a medical capacity a number of different startups. But what I find interesting about this particular group is that except for the couple of people that I knew, we have folks from all over the world in this startup that haven't actually all met in the same room yet. Everybody has essentially known each other from the very beginning in a virtual capacity. And that is something novel, even in the startup arena, from my experience.
That's very interesting. Okay,
Yeah, like
who have the
I'm
question?
gonna meet a teammate later today for the first time. And the
Yeah,
funny
you're
thing
flying,
was
right?
when Matt and I met, it was like how long did the novelness last, Matt? Like about 2 seconds?
Yeah, I think once we we've seen each other virtually for so long that it was like an old time acquaintance at the Indianapolis airport. So it was great.
Yeah, it was great. It was like I see Matt, I see hey, Matt's got some style. He's wearing a nice shirt. Hey, buddy, give him a
It's like
hug and
some
yeah, give
long
him a hug
distance
and
relationship that you
yeah,
finally met each other.
yeah, and you could give him a little hug and like get right to business. We start talking about what we were talking about, before we got on the plane, and it's just an amazing thing, guys. Whenever we as a clubhouse group meet, it's gonna be interesting because I asked Tyler when he met Lakeisha, like, how long did it last, and he's like, it was like a second, and just went on with the day, no uncomfortableness, and yeah. So sorry about that.
Okay, next, who wants to ask a question? Let me get this person up. Hey, man, do you have a question?
I have a question.
Oh, let Kemi go first then.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl, for hosting this amazing talk. And Chris, you are so amazing. Um, Doing a startup is extremely challenging. Doing a startup with a team that you may not have met everyone entirely face to face is unbelievable leadership. Can you talk a bit about some of the leadership practices that you do and some leadership advice that you have for other startup founders?
Sure, I'll take this one. For me, I treat being CEO as a position of service. I know I'm the one jumping up on the cars, screaming and yelling in meetings, like, let's go do this, let's go do that. But at the end of the day, I need to be a disciplined leader and support my team. And so one of my most powerful tools that I use is Calendly. It's not a plug. I don't work for them. It's this calendar aggregator. One of the issues we have on the team is Dr. Froelke's a doctor. He's probably got 2 or 3 personal calendars managing his schedule. Teresa's busy. Matt's busy. John's busy. So getting everybody in sync calendar-wise for meetings has been a challenge. So I discovered Calendly early in the pandemic. And what Calendly does is it lets you put all your calendars in one spot and then allows you to present your calendar to people to meet with you in like an Apple Store Genius Bar like setup where you just go pick a time and the Zoom meetings clocked automatically. You get an email, it populates everything. So what saves me is I have working hours of 5 a.m. Pacific to 7 p.m. Pacific, and then sometimes deeper into midnight because we do have team members in, I have a teammate in South Africa, Duncan, our lead engineer. So that tool's been very helpful because I do want to be there for my family too, right? So I make sure kids events are in my calendar. I make sure all of these things are in the calendar so that my team knows, hey, if I have to pick up the phone, I can always pick up the phone. But if we need to go through an hour-long meeting to really pound something out together, I can just grab a calendar spot, grab Chris, and get to it. And I think as a servant CEO, that's been my most powerful tool. I'm also the only one that's on the West Coast, so I feel it's unfair that, everything revolves around my schedule. So I've moved into, that type of structure in the company. And I feel that was a great question. I don't know how the team feels about if that's effective or not, but I found it an effective tool.
Yeah, no, Chris, it certainly is. But I was going to add something else because it's hard for a leader to be humble enough to say, here's what I do well, here's what I don't do well. But the question's a good one, and I think what Chris does well, at least for me, and I think for the team, is he takes feedback really well. I mean, he's very decisive. Obviously, you've got to be in a startup like this when decisions need to be made quickly. But again, having never met each other, physically, well, Chris and I have, but a lot of us haven't. It's hard to give really good direct feedback to people you really don't know or don't have that personal relationship with and contact. But for the times that we have, for a variety of different reasons, and had to give feedback, he listens, and if relevant, he takes it. So, I mean, I think for me, that's one of the characteristics of a good leader, not only being able to make decisions and being decisive, but being able to listen, hear feedback, and act on it where appropriate. So I'm glad to see Chris leading the team.
Thank you. Who wants to ask a question next?
Yeah, I've got.
Cal, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, do you want me to go ahead? Yeah. Chris, congratulations. You've done amazing stuff all since March, right? So it's amazing. That's like, just think about that, right? 4 months and you got this thing mobilized during the pandemic.
March
But
2020, we forget that we started
congratulations.
that.
And congratulations for Cheryl to set up this space. It's just amazing. Going deeper on entrepreneurs and their journey. Just what we need. I have a question. It's probably a little, I want to think about it a little bit, but let's say 3 years from now, Tyler's reading a headline that relates to your business and your industry and the space that you just talked about. What do you think that headline should be, and which publication should it be in? You may want to think about that one a little bit as a team.
I'm going to let Teresa answer this one because, in my opinion, our focus right now in fluidics is in the delivery of care to patients. And I think patient advocacy is at the center of that. So I think it would lean, if I want to throw a CEO slant at it, I want to see it be a medical publication about the dent we make in medicine. I have more crazy ambitions with, I've been told not to use the word crazy. I have more bigger, broader ambitions with fluidics because of the potential of the platform. So, making sure that we leave our mark in medicine, in my opinion, is our first job. But there are much other bigger goals, I think, with the platform. In the 60s, they got as far as making computers out of fluidics. So We're just at the very beginning.
So this is Teresa. I think, the headline would say, fluidics changes the world by helping people breathe, and that it's in, it's the cover of Life magazine, because that's what we're really talking about. It's the difference between life and death. And, I started in this space accidentally. I was a television news reporter, and my father was diagnosed with a deadly lung disease, which tells you the theme of our organization. That's why a lot of us are doing what we're doing. And subsequently, I helped my dad's transplant surgeon work in the space. I've served on boards for the top medical associations for thoracic and pulmonary medicine. And what I discovered was that it wasn't just a problem for some people, it's a problem for everyone. If you stop breathing right now, you have about 3 minutes left, unless someone provides emergency resuscitation. And the reality is that could be any one of us at any point and any time in our lives. And I think right now in the pandemic, surely there's not anyone who hasn't thought about breathing over the last year and a half. I think we all think about it. And what we have realized is that there are people, even before the pandemic, who were dying simply because they didn't have access to tools that would save their lives. And even now, across our nation, in rural parts of America, there are places where patients are being triaged. And doctors, I've read in just recent weeks, people have had to make these decisions. And it's one of my close friends, her father had COVID, and because he was of a certain age and had some pre-existings, he wasn't offered a ventilator, and he died. And these are real challenges in our world. And so when we're talking about equity and equality across our world, we need to be also thinking about equity and equality when it comes to life-saving tools. And for me, the headline is that, everyone on the planet has access to life-saving tools.
Thank you. Okay, Heyman, you have a question?
Yeah, this is John. I've got a question.
Oh, John, go ahead, John.
Yeah, so first of all, Chris and team, congrats on building just a fantastic culture for innovation and motivation on your team. Really impressive. Just by way of a little bit of background, um, I was board certified in critical care, director of a critical care unit, and one of the original physicians on one of the Life Flight helicopter systems where I flew a couple hundred missions. And so your early comments, Chris, resonated with me immensely. When you're a physician in a helicopter and trying to keep one or two people alive while you're flying in very close quarters and trying to keep the lines running and adjust the meds, um, it's a real challenge to be bagging a patient at the same time. And typically you've got a pilot, a nurse, and a physician. And so there's not a lot of extra hands to help out like there is in a ground-based situation. So I think what you're working on would be profoundly helpful in that context. What I'm curious about is in ICU situations, you frequently have to adjust the tidal volume, the pressure, and an individual patient's lung compliance will change based upon whether they've got fluid overload or not, whether they've got underlying fibrosis or not, whether they have collapsed lungs or a fluid on the lungs. And so there's a lot of parameters you have to dial into these big, expensive machines. Do you see a future at which the microfluidics approach would allow you to dial in specific combinations of settings to adapt to an individual patient? Or do you see the simplicity of the device warranting a use cases that are not necessarily universal? So how do you envision the target use cases for the device in the end game?
So I think I can answer a little bit about this question. So from the beginning, this initial series of devices is specifically designed for the simplicity. And so in the environment of short transports, transfers, say from an ICU through to the MRI or down the hall or from the emergency department to the ICU, those type of transportations where some of the settings are unlikely to be intentionally and necessarily modified. A device like this that doesn't have those moving parts and doesn't have those modifications that could be otherwise inadvertently changed or would lead to a complexity that could be confusing is how the initial design is set up to take away some of those intentionally to keep it simple. However, I can say that our engineers are absolutely amazing, and the marvels of fluidics absolutely have the opportunity to design either specific devices that are tuned to a particular disease state, where the lung conditions are unique and the pressures and so forth that are desired are unique to a particular disease. We have the opportunity of developing a family of invent devices that can accommodate a variety of those type of diseases. The other possibility is that with the same information that we have gathered through the tedious and time-consuming development of our initial family of products, that we have the opportunity of expanding it to more individualized design for individualized patients. And those are all absolutely within the confines of the physics and the design of our system. The last piece that you asked about is that our technology, the fluidics of this particular design, are also capable of being implemented and incorporated into other existing devices that would want to include the magic of fluidics into those devices. And so we are likely to see not necessarily a standalone product perhaps, but an integration into existing more complicated systems to accommodate those internal workings.
So, John, I'm going to get nerdy with you, buddy, because I love and respect you. You're one of the smartest people I've ever run into anywhere. So one of the questions we asked Dr. Walsh is how much oxygen or how much minute volume does a patient need? And so we learned that number is anywhere from 100 to 150 grams per kilo of body weight. That's how we normalize things in respiratory care. So with that number, we can determine what the minute volume is. And so what's unique about this device, John, is, so when we first got it, I was handed a Peep Titration. And how that works is, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to explain to you guys how to do a Peep Titration, but you basically figure out a person's weight, you figure out an approximate tidal volume to send, and then you observe how the pressure, what the pressure is to figure out, do you need to dial it up or dial it down? And then after that, you kind of need to do some math to figure out with this tidal volume, to hit this minute volume, I need to deliver X number of breaths, right? And so what's unique about this device is it's fixed minute volume with a fixed driving pressure. And so we have a standard PEEP and we have a standard peak pressure set. And because of that, and because of the uniqueness of patient physiology, the only thing that can change in the system is the patient's physiology, meaning the stretchiness of their lung, and that results in a tidal volume change, but also a corresponding respiratory rate change. So my simplest break it down analogy is, as you're at a kid's water park, you've seen those buckets that spill, right? It's a constant stream of water. It's a bucket. When it hits a certain point, the bucket dumps. Imagine this as your lung getting filled up by our valve. Now, healthy people have a bucket that's fairly big and stretchy. Sick people have very stiff lungs that aren't very stretchy, and they're therefore smaller buckets. So if you have the same amount of flow, smaller buckets, you're going to get more tipping of that bucket. And as you deal with the healthier patient that has the better, bigger bucket, it's going to fill up more slowly and cycle slower. So we actually exploit this in our protocol to create, number one, an automatic device that can handle a good chunk of the population automatically with pressure control, but also a way of indicating, is this patient's compliance getting better or worse? And then applying a corresponding change in pressure to give them a little bit more therapy. So, John, to get really deep, when we get the sickest, most ARDS, like, Berlin definition of ARDS, we deliver 30/14 in pressure, and we make sure that we increase the rate a couple breaths, because towards that physiology, the ratio of dead space to alveolar volume gets higher. And so you have to compensate by adding more breaths, because you are able to ventilate less because they're getting more dead space ratio. And so, sorry to get so deep into it, John, but this one little
No,
piece of plastic manages all of that, believe it or not. And that's what's the real revolution we were sitting on.
no, that's brilliant, and a great answer. What one suggestion I'd make is, as your product and company evolve, is that your current highest level design criteria is simplicity, and I think you need to stick with that for the use cases that you're attacking right now, because I think that's just, when
Absolutely.
when you're scooping and hauling two or three, people who are on the verge of dying, you don't want to be dialing a bunch of devices. You want simplicity. Get them to an ED where they can be put on a full vent quickly. So I think that the simplicity by design is your lead design criteria, has
Yep.
to stick for that use case for precisely the reasons you're doing it. My suggestion would be that as you expand into these other use cases, and I do think you will find the path to do that through, relatively simple physics, but a ton of experimentation and a ton of validation and a ton of safety checks, that you might be careful to insulate your simplicity device team from the complexity device team, so that they don't get confused with their different sets of design criteria. Not that they shouldn't meet periodically and share lessons learned, but I think you might anticipate a bifurcation of your team. You're too small now, but if things go as we all hope they will, you probably want to bifurcate the team to prevent too much confusion and rework based upon changing design criteria in those two different sets of use cases. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Appreciate the feedback there. And you're right. It's just our number one mantra in the company, and it's been this way for at least 15, 16 months, is Albert Einstein says the definition of genius is taking the complex and making it simple. And so that's the mantra of fluidIQ. I don't want to get too nerdy, but I named this company deliberately fluidIQ because, number one, it's a play on the word fluidic. You pronounce it fast, it's fluidic. You look for a word about fluid intelligence, and fluid intelligence really describes what we did here. We took people that weren't experts in a field and applied what's called fluid intelligence to the problem. You take differing views, you take diversity of views, thought, and capability, and you throw those all into a pot, and what comes out is what you have here at fluidIQ. There's a couple unspoken engineers that haven't, they're busy or a different time of the world, different part of the world. But those two engineers, my two partners on the engineering side, I live for their smiles on the conference calls, because if I see a giant smile on Duncan's face, I know we had a breakthrough the night before. And so that's the other unique thing about this team, is like the unsung heroes come from unexpected places. The real person that drove the revolution in the design is Art. He's not here yet, but he made a kind of a messing around discovery. He discovered that when he broke the legs on one of our test devices, it still worked. And like as a light bulb moment, I said, hey, well, now we can make it much thinner. We can maybe make it inline. Let's try an inline module. And in a weekend, I sent the team these texts. We always just use iMessage. And guys, it happened like a weekend, right? Like we went from generation one into invent in like a weekend. And it's just that, that fluid intelligence of problem solving that is unique. So, yeah, sorry to ramble on.
That's
No, that's
great.
very, very
Okay.
cool.
Yep. Thank you. We have time for last one or two questions. Who would like to ask a question?
I would.
Hello.
I
Sorry.
have a
Go ahead,
question.
Walter.
Okay, the water fast warrior, since you are according to PTR order, you can go first.
Yes, thank you. Questions, Chris. Obviously, everybody else can pitch in. First of all, I want to grow up to be you, uh, and that's a compliment. First of all, a little bit of my background, then my question. Um, my background was 29 years in software, computer programming. I've been part of 4 startups in 4 different fields, and then in 2019, I decided to go and cure my type 2 diabetes. Um, Luckily, I attracted the attention of an endocrinologist. He's also an assistant clinical professor with the School of Medicine at USC. And in collaboration with him, he was like my academic advisor, and I was able to bone up on all the latest terms and understand all the latest research in fasting in the United States and Europe. With his help, I developed my own fasting protocol and cured my type 2 diabetes in 4 months and 6 days. So then I went and got experience in being a moderator at online forums and helping people and building how this protocol can help other people. And then in May of this year, I had a negative reaction to the Pfizer vaccine. Essentially, I landed in the emergency room with congestive heart failure. And then it occurred to me, maybe I can see if my fasting protocol can see if it can heal the damage from that. And I attracted the attention of a PhD in molecular biology who also happens to be a researcher for several stem cell therapy companies. And it's to the point that I believe, again, there is no research on this. No one's ever tried this. But I do believe my protocol, using extended fast, can address primarily mitochondria impairment and address the issues of cardiac fibrosis. And the primary baseline biomarker will be the left ventricle ejection fraction. Mine, when I was hospitalized, had dropped down to 40%. And the way I've structured my experiment, I'm about to start it once I get over this cold, will last 120 days. And then I'll retake the stress test to see what my LVEF is.
Oh,
So I'm
water
at this
fast
point.
warrior. Sorry. Do you have
Yes,
a question for
yes, yeah.
Chris specific to his startup?
Yeah, I had to give a little bit of background. So
Okay.
specifically, I paired up with an inventor of the Q strip who Chris knows. It measures nocturnal sweat. So specifically, I'm trying to determine a positive correlation with what I'm trying to achieve and the Q strip and monitoring my heart health primarily from the nocturnal sweat patterns. Because the primary issue in post-cardiac patients is once they get out of, the hospital and everything, how do you make sure they stay in compliance? And specifically with the Q strip, it's inobtrusive. It's basically a sensor strip that's under the mattress, so it can monitor a person's nocturnal sweat patterns throughout the night, and you can build the data over months, even years. So,
Your
and I'm trying to create
question
that.
is?
Yeah. The question is that right now I'm trying to find a cardiologist to become who I can consult with, and then also I'm trying to look into raising funds. So how do you handle multiple demands on your time when you're basically at the research phase? Thank you.
It's just real simple. You have a problem that, needs to be solved, and you find the people that need to solve the problem. I don't mean to dismiss your challenge. I know you personally. I know Dan personally, but like you have to just find allies, and it takes time. I mean, I think you'll find it. And Duncan is down there. Dunk, if you can come up, that'd be awesome, man.
Yeah, and I may have some recommendations as well. One of the great pieces that we have with this team and the leadership style is that we're all allowed to and encouraged to function based upon our highest level of capability. And we share collectively those areas where we may not necessarily be quite as strong. But unlike other models, we recognize that and we embrace and we encourage new talent to come in that share those high-level skills that we're looking for. Rather than trying to work at our level of least capability, we are allowed to thrive in this leadership environment and maximize our skills while sharing other aspects of the of this great endeavor with other people. And so it certainly sounds like as you juggle some of these multiple different aspects and look for other talent and so forth, what I would say is take a little bit of a tip from Chris and the team here, and don't try to do it all yourself. Find those key allies who can share that burden, that vision, and that excitement with you, and share in the benefit of that vision and that targeted focus, as opposed to trying to do it all yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to make it sound dismissive, but it's just, you just got to find allies. I know Joyce is down there. She's got, she's finding allies here and elsewhere. You're going to find it at Aleppo, and Don's got tons of resources. He's got tons of the 24/7 lobby, polling for him. Q-Strip is an amazing product. It just takes time. I know it's hard for us. We're just blessed in that this is a world crisis, right? So when you have crisis proportion problems, the people that can respond to it are a much larger subset. I know that what you're dealing with and what you're proposing has got a large application, but right now it's an N of a very small amount because you're trying to prove it out. And it's challenging to find, that group if it's not a gigantic known problem at the time. Like, I'm not saying the problem you're dealing with isn't large. It's just we may not even know about it. But ventilators were front and center in March of 2020, and they're not so much now. But the reason we're still here is that we're still focused on the mission that brought us together, which is to help patients that can't breathe.
Thank you. Thank you. Aram, you have a question too?
Yes, thank you so much, Cheryl
Go
and
ahead.
Chris, for your amazing invention. I'm really inspired by your mission and your team. Applauding for all of you. John already asked one of the questions that I had, but in ICU setting, I have witnessed a lot of PPV-related injuries. So I'm hoping and assuming that this device would reduce that type of injury in patient, given that there is no positive pressure involved. Am I assuming correctly?
There is positive pressure involved, but it's extremely precise at controlling the pressure given a flow. So when you set the flow to 20 liters per minute, each device is going to deliver the rated pressure. So it's going to deliver, like 30 centimeters plus or minus 2 centimeters of water. And for those that don't know the measurement system, 1 psi is 70 centimeters. So the gradation that we work in is in 0.03 psi. So these little plastic devices are extremely accurate and precise. And so our hope is that, and that's why we named it the hope as well, is that it'll be able to protect patients, give them that lung protective care.
Thank you so much, Chris, because yes, prevention is my, mission and passion. So I'm so grateful and all the best. Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody.
Next, Vinay have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Thank you for the room. Chris and team, amazing. Thank you for everything that you're doing to impact lives and save lives. So my question is really, because I'm sitting outside of the US and in Asia, as you guys are doing the design and all of that, are you also looking at use cases for other countries, global markets, where the situation on the ground, whether in ICUs or elsewhere, is slightly different? The equipment, is it something that's scalable to different conditions? That's my question.
I'll take that if no one else from the team does. I just feel like I'm monopolizing the convo.
So
Sure.
Brian Froelke works in those environments. Brian, why don't you answer that?
Yes. So, number one, yes, the device is scalable and distributable because it is something that can be 3D printed or injection molded. It has the possibility of the schematics being electronically transmitted. And just about everywhere in the world, there should be a facility that would be capable of ramping up the production in the thousands for this particular device. It is likely to be very cost effective because of the materials being used. And because of the lack of shortages of chips and other types of expensive types of equipment make things more complicated, it is likely to be cost effective and therefore sustainable in a number of different environments where, $30,000, $50,000 ventilators, while they may have certain capabilities, may not be sustainable either through the understanding of how to use them in terms of the skilled providers to use them. They may not be sustainable because of the parts, the maintenance, etc., or they may be too expensive to deploy. This particular device will hopefully solve a number of those problems. The other piece about this is that it is a tool that offers a solution, but we also recognize in the international arena that it is a tool that is part of and it must be incorporated with experts in the field and an understanding of the unique individual social and cultural climate in which we're hoping to deploy them. So we recognize that while this device has many opportunities in rural, austere, in surge capacity and other developing countries, we also need to find and seek those allies in those individual specialty arenas who can maximize the incorporation of this tool in the complex socioeconomic structure in which we're hoping to introduce it. But yes, a lot of opportunities in the international field. The one other piece is that there's always that immediate need. And so at any given point, if somewhere we recognize that there is an immediate need for just this device, while we are focused on the safety and efficacy and going through the regulatory process and all of those pieces in order to ensure that this device makes it to be able to be used, we also want to recognize that we have a duty for due diligence in pursuing those areas where it could potentially save an immediate life. And so don't hesitate to reach out to us if you find key individuals internationally where there's an immediate demand and an opportunity to save immediate patient lives.
Hey, Brian, I'm sorry. If you don't mind, let me just jump in because I just wanted to answer it a little bit differently and maybe a reach out as well. I think that's a great question. 60% of maybe 50 to 55% of the use of manual resuscitators, and those the bag valve masks, are outside the U.S. And so, as Brian said, the ability to affect patients outside the U.S. is critical. We've filed, a patent cooperation treaty filing, PCT, which protects our intellectual property for up to 150 countries. So it's absolutely critical that we get the technology out. What we're having to do now is to really ferret, and really determine a strategic partner, because a number of different strategic partners are interested in the technology, but to choose the one or two that are going to be best able to help us deliver the maximum opportunity, not just in the U.S., but around the world. So I think it's critical that as we reach out and evaluate the different strategic partners, that we find one that is able to really, again, maximize the opportunity outside the U.S.
So just want a quick follow up, Chris and Matt. Thanks so much, and everybody. I work with a couple of medical device companies out here in India and in Asia. So, Chris, I'll reach out to you back channel and try and connect you with some folks.
Yeah, we'll go grab a subway, Vinay.
Fantastic.
In Moldova.
Okay, let's go to Heyman for the last question before we wrap. Heyman?
Yeah, thanks. So as you know, I know I'm a physician who in rehab, so I know about the end post ICU stay, the post respiratory issues. But let me ask you, as I think you alluded to, Matt and Brian just now, I was wondering about the competitive advantages that you'll have over the existing technologies, right? How are you going to sell this? I mean, at the end of the day, to help more people, you have to make sure that this is going to be sustainable? And also, is it replicatable? I mean, can this technology be replicated by some other company? And you mentioned, I think, Matt, you mentioned you were patenting internationally. Like, how are you going to be making sure that you ensure that this vision that this group has created sustains itself going forward?
No, Heyman, that's a great question. I think not just the provisional patent filing, which again protects you in 150 countries and allows you to determine which ones you want to file in. We've also filed a number of provisional patents on the technology that Chris and the other engineers have developed with the other founders. So we hope the issuance of those, is one moat to be able to protect us. But I think your point about differentiation is a good one. I mean, I think we were tasked with making sure the simplicity message is certainly a key part of the initial offering, and it's the ability to again offer an efficient and simplistic device that hopefully allows the care providers, healthcare professionals, paramedics, physicians to be less involved in having to hold a mask on a patient's face and squeeze the bag at the same time. So there is some efficiency in both the delivery and the training, but also it's the safety that also will come into play based on being able to provide lung protective ventilation through, as Chris stated, very well set pressures that are going to allow for that. So I think it's kind of a dual, again, marketing strategy that's going to have to be, tailored to what the particular opportunity is there. But at the end of the day, it's saving lives and saving lungs. And, I think that message is going to, resonate, we hope, pretty well.
And then
Thank you.
Heyman, sorry, and then we'll close the room, I promise. And to really just address the issue head on, I'll say something unpopular, and investors probably won't like this, but if there's an entrant into our market and they're using it to deliver the same or better level of care to patients, then I'm very Scandinavian about it. We're collaborators in the goal of making patients safer. So when that happens, I'm gonna be a little bit set back, but at the same time, I'll smile because that means we're making our dent and others want to join us in that fight. And then the inventor in me says, come and get it, boys, because I've already got Gen 2 and 3 designed. So let's go.
Thank you. Tom, you have the last comment?
Hey, Chris, great job by you and your team on this startup. A quick question for you. I've been mentored over the years by the former COO of Abbott Labs. He's in his 80s, but still very active in this space, helping startups. I'd like to connect you with Jack, who, like you, has bigger and crazy ideas. Let me know if you're okay with that.
That'd be great, Tom. I know we're friends offline, and I've always valued your support and your feedback. Like Matt mentioned, I do take feedback, guys, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chris, before we wrap, you have any plug to drop?
I would just say, guys, hope for the future. All I would say is these days we can't even agree on much, but if we can agree to focus on the future, meaning the future of humanity being the children, I think we're going to solve a lot of the problems. I've never entered a situation where someone's been kind to my child or my children, and I have not responded with some form of kindness and reciprocation. So I think if you could start with that as your commonality, when you see some mother out there with her children having a tough day, just give her a smile. Give her a, hey, mom, you're doing a good job. Because that's literally all we need to do to push the ball forward for humanity. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris and team. We are now coming to the end of today's startup with fluidIQ. Thank you, everybody in the audience and on stage for such an amazing session. We'll take a short break. In 15 minutes' time, tech news around the world will be starting. So please jump over there. And today's startup, if you have any amazing startup founders around you, or if you are one, just let me know. I'll try my best to schedule you for a 1-hour session like this, so that we'll be able to benefit the whole startup ecosystem and the community. Thank you very much. With that, this room
Thank you,
is going to
Cheryl.
close in 5, 4, three.